Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special meeting on the NC Carbon Plan. I'm June Blotnick, the Executive Director of CleanAIRE NC. This is my 17th year with the organization, and I've worked on all kinds of regulatory, legislative, legal, and grassroots actions over the years, fighting alongside our partners to clean up our energy sector and make it more equitable for all ratepayers. And while we've made some progress, it's been a difficult road, given the fact that we live in a state where our electric company is a monopoly. Because the healthcare and environmental costs from pollution don't show up on the balance sheets of investor-owned utilities, it's been a struggle to make meaningful change in how electricity is generated and who ends up carrying the burden of the costs. The creation of the North Carolina Carbon Plan this year provides a significant opportunity for North Carolinians to visualize what we want and need our energy future to look like, and to tell that to the North Carolina Utilities Commission. And the commission is made up of 7 individuals who are charged with regulating the rates and services of our public utilities. And if you don't know who they are, you should really check out the website at ncuc.net. It's just amazing that there's just 7 people making the decision. So today, what we're going to do is our best to give you a high-level overview of the carbon plan, how the process came about, what Duke Energy's draft plan looks like, the good, the bad, and ugly as we see it, and how you can play a role in what our energy future in our state will look like and get engaged. So I am going to go to the next slide. Our presenters today are listed here, and they'll introduce themselves prior to their remarks. I wanted to mention that each of us has completed the North Carolina Climate Ambassadors Training Program, which you'll hear about in a few minutes, and 3 of us serve as trainers for that program. If you are a climate ambassador, or if you heard about this and participated in our Pulling Back the Curtain energy series last fall, or if you're a Charlotte-Mecklenburg climate leader, let people know about that in the chat. That would be good to know. So we'll move on to our agenda for today. So we will send you the slides tomorrow, just so you know that. But the agenda for today is, I'll start out by just talking a little bit about those 3 programs I mentioned from CleanAIRE NC and the kind of climate and education, climate advocacy and education work we're doing. Then we'll go into the road to the North Carolina Carbon Plan, what it took to get here. Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, we're going to go over that a little bit for those of you who are not familiar with it. And then we'll hear a report from John Gaertner on a process that we went through a few years ago with Duke Energy, looking at their climate report. And after that, John will go over the portfolio options. There are 4 portfolio options in that draft plan. And then we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then we'll end with how to get engaged with this process. And I just want to mention that, we want all of you to get engaged at some level, but also encourage you to reach out to your city or your town to intervene in the process, especially if they have set carbon reduction goals of their own. So the city of Charlotte, for example, will be intervening because they have passed a plan to reduce their carbon emissions, and all of the towns and cities across North Carolina are dependent on what Duke Energy does. So just want to mention that on the front end. Okay, so say a few words here about CleanAIRE NC's climate education and advocacy programs. We do have a group called the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Climate Leaders. This group was organized about 3 years ago when, maybe even longer, when Charlotte was putting together a strategic energy action plan and a resolution to cut their carbon emissions within the city's buildings and fleet. And that group of individuals and organizations they've been meetings monthly since then. So for the last 3 years, we have monthly meetings. Anybody is welcome to join. We support the city, we challenge the city and Mecklenburg County as well on the path to low carbon future here in Charlotte. The other program that we held, I mentioned last fall, it was a series of 6 webinars called Pulling Back the Curtain, Who's Charting Our Energy Future. And this was, I hope many of you, I think, were able to participate in at least one of those sessions. And those were led by Nancy LaPlaca, primarily. Will Barber Jr. also led us on one of those sessions. So we have a link, like I said, you'll get the slides with all these links and you can access all those sessions on our website. So I'm just going to go to the next slide and let Jennifer Roberts talk a little bit about our North Carolina Climate Ambassadors Program. Jennifer?
Thanks, June. And I'm going to be quick because we have a bunch of information on some specific things that you can help advocate on. So I'm going to quickly go over this. Many of you have had this training. Some of you signed up and didn't complete it. There is now an online version through EcoAmerica. This partnership started with EcoAmerica. And if you go to their website, the Path to Positive Communities part of their website, that is where you'll find the online training for a general overview of being a climate ambassador. What we're doing here in North Carolina is bringing you specific information on the governor's executive orders, on what North Carolina law says, on what cities can do, and helping really zero in on the advocacy that we need. And so our training covers an overview of global warming and climate change, specific impacts that we see here in North Carolina. We're one of the most challenged states for climate impacts, and then solutions that are available and can work with existing state law, and also initiatives that local governments can undertake. We do have quarterly meetings, like this is one of them, that talk about current topics and also give you an opportunity to network, because we need to grow the advocacy network here in North Carolina. So we will have a little bit of time at the end today for you to share some of that. Feel free to share emails in the chat. Many of you already have each other's emails, but we're continuing to grow this network because we know things don't change unless voters push their representatives to change, especially with all the range of issues that are out there. So we welcome those who are ambassadors. Continue to write your op-eds, speak to your, civic groups, Rotary clubs, book clubs, etc. We need to continue to put climate and environmental solutions in front of folks. Many times our local governments just don't know about what's available, and we're helping them do that. So that's a quick overview, and I'll send it back to you, June.
All right, thanks, Jennifer. We'll move along, and Joel, I think I'm turning it over to you. Did I not? Hang on one second. Yes.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, so how did we get here? What's the plan forward? We're going to give a quick overview of the policies and some of the political back and forth that have gone on in our state to get us to the point where one of the nation and world's largest utilities is now putting forward a plan to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. So it started back in October when Governor Cooper, October 2018, when Governor Cooper issued Executive Order 80, which sets some purely ambitious, emission reduction, I guess we'd call them goals on the electric sector. And it was limited to the electric sector, and it required advocates, the company, academic institutions to all begin to work together to try to find solutions to meet those goals. Following that effort, and we'll get to this in a moment, the General Assembly decided to chime in and codify those goals into law. Additionally, CleanAIRE and SEED worked on a regulatory action to ensure that the goals set in law and set by Governor Cooper are met as kind of a backstop. In June of 2021, Governor Cooper went a step further and he issued Executive Order 218, which advances North Carolina's wind energy goals. January 2022, the governor issued Executive Order 246, which finally addressed environmental justice and, well, I shouldn't say addressed it, it begins to address environmental justice in North Carolina. And it creates a way that the general public can better participate with state agencies. It also sets economy-wide, so not just the electric sector, but it sets economy-wide greenhouse gas and not just carbon dioxide reduction goals. So this was a step in the right direction as well, but also largely ambitious. It's not a done deal. So what we plan on discussing today, when we get to it, is how we can turn that ambition into action. June, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide.
Yeah, that's what I'm using.
Or Kelly, maybe.
Sorry about that. Let's see. There you go.
So as I mentioned, the North Carolina General Assembly stepped into the fold after Executive Order 80 and drafted House Bill 951. This was a bipartisan effort that was titled the Energy Solutions for North Carolina Act. It establishes a mass-based cap on carbon dioxide emissions from the energy sector and sets two goals. One, to be 70%, to see a 70% reduction in CO2 by 2050, and to see a reduction to net zero by 2050. A mass-based cap essentially means that Duke, the regulated utility in our state, has the ability to emit up to a certain point. They can do that any way they like, in any way, shape, or form, using a variety of resources that they have at their disposal. There are caveats, carve-outs in this law that allow Duke to go past their deadlines. And it does a variety of other things, such as creating a stakeholder process to help shape the state's carbon plan. It changes the frequency that the company has to submit their integrated resource plans, or IRPs. And it gives Duke the option to retire coal plants using a mechanism called securitization, which we'll get into a bit later. All in all, we believe that this was a step in the right direction. Essentially, it's a carbon tax. This gives Duke the ability to basically pass the buck onto the ratepayers, and it's a means for them to reduce their emissions, their carbon emissions specifically. So June, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide. So because it is only a mass-based cap and it has so many carve-outs, we believe that it is now more important than ever that the state continue with its development of a regulatory action that CleanAIRE NC and our partners, the NC Coastal Federation and the Southern Environmental Law Center, undertook to include our state in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is also a carbon tax called a cap and trade mechanism. This requires that the company, not individuals, pay the tax up front. So instead of just using the NCUC as the means to tax people, this requires that Duke pays for their emissions. And because they're paying for their emissions, it holds them accountable to actually reducing their emissions and encourages the use of renewable energies instead of dirty fossil fuels. So the petition has been approved by the state's Environmental Management Commission. It is now undergoing a regulatory impact analysis at the Department of Environmental Quality. DEQ will finalize that impact analysis, put it on public display. The public will have an opportunity to comment on the rule's development. It will go back to the EMC for final approval, and then it will likely go to the legislature for additional scrutiny. So all that to say is this RGGI can be a part of the carbon plan and should be a part of the carbon plan, because as we're about to point out, there are significant holes and RGGI will do a very good job plugging those holes. June, if you'd like to continue. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to John Gaertner, a CleanAIRE NC member and we'll just say an energy expert. John, I'll leave it to you to introduce yourself.
Well, thank you very much, Joel, and welcome everyone this afternoon. Yes, I'm a consultant. I've really spent the last 2 years very much involved in following the Duke Energy climate strategy, evaluating it critically, and their energy policy. And I participated greatly in the stakeholder process that Duke conducted for January, February, and March, where they were telling the community about what they intended to do and hearing back from us. So I'm really hopefully in a good position to talk to you about this. Prior to that, I was the lead author on this report, with the cover of which is on your screen, where on behalf of CMCL, 10 of us, environmental people, reviewed with full cooperation of Duke Energy, we reviewed their climate strategy and their climate report. And we issued a report in January of 2021, and then we worked with them throughout 2021 on the findings and recommendations that we made in this report. And so that began this particular carbon plan process. And so we really felt it was wonderful timing to have some impact on the carbon plan. And so that's really the question that was posed here. Did the draft carbon plan have an impact, and did they incorporate our recommendations? Next slide, please, June. And so I couldn't possibly go over all this in detail with you in the time allotted. We really only have a few minutes for this, but we made eight what we said were our primary recommendations to Duke, things that they needed to work on and enhance their program. And these 8 things are listed here. If you just read the highlighted portions, you get the gist of it. And then at the end of the year after the report, we went to Duke and said, tell us in writing what you thought of the recommendations and what you've done on them. And they sent us a letter back and said, they felt that all 8 of our recommendations were important and valid, and that they had made progress on all 8. And so we felt great about that. And I think you'll see in the NC report, I'll be able to point out the ways in which we had some impact. But briefly, the 8 items are, we felt that this idea of the least cost planning requirement that Duke had to plan under really needed revised in light of modern problems. And in fact, as Joel said to you, the new law does address that in partially. Also, we told them they've got to get serious about offshore wind, get smart about it, plan it better, and they've done that. We've told them they needed to participate in making sure they had a workable carbon policy, carbon cost policy. And that's probably the one weakest area, actually, where they've not made a great deal of progress. But actually, that depends not just on them, but on regulators and on the legislature. We told them they needed to get serious about maximizing renewables. And we think they've made some great steps there. They didn't get all the way where we wanted them, but you'll see in the portfolio that we show that they have gotten a lot smarter in how to maximize renewables, and they've done a good job. We told them if they're going to propose advanced generation technologies, they use the term Zelfer, which for those technologies, if they're going to use them, they have to be smart, and they have to evaluate them critically and prove that they're the right direction to go. And we think they've done some good work there. We told them that hydrogen as a fuel is a good prospect, and we wanted them to get smarter there. They took some positive steps there. We told them their smart grid and what they call edge of grid technology was going to be more important, and they've taken measures there. And finally, we told them that we needed to have really good metrics, because whatever plan they gave us and the state, whatever plan they proposed, we really needed to have strict monitoring, and we needed to have critical assessment of it. And they've come up and given us some of that in the plan. So we feel pretty good about it. And we believe this carbon plan has improved their planning over what 2 years ago was a much more primitive IRP submittal. So with that, I'd like to move to the next topic, which is to give you an overview of the 4 draft energy portfolio options that Duke has put into this plan. What they've said to us is they've given us 4 portfolio options. Now, let me tell you what a portfolio option is. They take some very sophisticated mathematical they simulate what their what their energy system is going to look like starting today, and they simulate it continuously through the year 2050. And they simulate it in such a way to try to achieve the carbon goals in 2030 and 2050, but also to meet the other requirements that they have for cost, for carbon, not only cost, but for reliability and other criteria. And they run those simulations for probably tens, if not 100s of scenarios. And from those, they select a subset that they say could be the basis for their future planning. And they've proposed these 4, and they want the commission to accept all 4 as possible scenarios. And as they move forward, they'll decide which of they're closely related. And so as they move forward, they'll be able to decide which of 4 strategies eventually they end on. And of course, I think after, each 2 years, these will be reviewed, so these strategies will change. But for now, these are the 4 portfolios. If you go, there are really 4 rows on this chart, and they are the 4 scenarios. Only the first one meets the 70% 2030 goal. The other ones are delayed because they've elected to use advanced technologies that have the law allows them to delay slightly to 2032 or 2034. I obviously can't go through each of these in detail, but I do want to go over and show you which technologies are involved, and those are represented by those colored circles on the top. The first technology, or the first generation issue they deal with, is what they call grid edge, and that's their efforts to try to either reduce energy use by energy efficiency, or to collaborate with the end users, where the end user is making making energy themselves, and Duke is collaborating in the use of that energy. The second circle is coal retirements, and this is they have aggressively, compared to their last report, aggressively scheduled their coal retirement so that there will be essentially no coal generated in this region by the end of 2030, although some of their coal plants may be converted to natural gas. So that's a sort of a win for us. Some people think we could go further. That's great, but it's still a good victory. The next circle is new solar. There's much more new solar in their planning than there ever was before, and that's good. Again, is there enough? That's the question. The next one is batteries, and that's a form of energy, essentially a form of energy storage. Energy storage is important because it gives them flexibility and enables them to put more renewables on the grid if they have good storage, because you can't, when you make electricity, you have to use it or put it somewhere. It goes away otherwise. So storage is important, and so they have much more storage in this plan than they had in their past. Onshore, it's called onshore wind. It's really land-based wind. For the first time, there's significant land-based wind proposed in all of the scenarios. Offshore wind, Duke, in an exciting thing that happened just weeks ago, Duke now has access to a very large plot of offshore area to build offshore wind power, and they've proposed to do that in these scenarios. They've also proposed to build more nuclear generation, and it's just a very tiny bit in this plan through 2030. And they've proposed to build more hydro, which is exciting because this is also new, and hydro is, the way they're proposing it at least, this is a pretty good environmental thing, because they're not going to build new reservoirs for this hydro. They're going to use existing reservoirs and just pump more water through it. So it has little negative environmental impact, and hopefully good, because it's clean energy. And finally, these two circles at the end that are in orange are the gas plants. CC stands for combined cycle. These are the very efficient large gas plants that they intend to build, new plants. And the next one are the single cycle gas turbine plants, which are also gas plants, but they're more associated with, they'll just run a little bit of the time for peaking power. These are very controversial because the environmentalists don't want, they feel if we build these gas plants, they're still burning fossil fuels, and it's going to be hard to transition off of these to clean energy. So this is much smaller gas planning than was in their IRPs. So there's good news in all these plans, but there's still challenges to do better. Now I have another chart, if you don't mind, and I'm not going to go over it. It's really the same four portfolios, but projected from essentially from 2030 to 2035. And you'll see now they look a lot like each other. So Duke is really saying that a lot of this has to do with the timing of when they're going to do these things. They're giving us a package of 4 different ways of doing it, but a lot of them have to do with timing and delays and so forth. The only thing I want to say about this chart is that the first chart is the only one that reaches the 70% goal by 2030. The others are delayed a few years. And if you looked at the detail of this, which you can in the executive summary for this report, if you look at it, you'll see that not only is this the only plan that meets at 2030, but it has the least risk of failing to meet the goal. The other ones are relying on advanced technologies, and those technologies could be late, or they could be more costly than we expected, or they could fail to reach the level of clean energy that we're hoping for. So there's a whole lot of reasons to like that first path. And so that's sort of something to keep in mind as you advocate for your particular issues on this. And so with that, I'm going to pass this along, I believe, to Ethan. Was I wrong?
Nope, you're right, John.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you. Hi, everyone. Ethan Blumenthal. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Good Solar, nonprofit.
One second, Ethan. Sorry,
Yep.
I'm gonna just say a quick word about the good, the bad, and the ugly here.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted to just quickly note the reason why we're laying it out this way is because the carbon plan isn't clear cut. There are things that are good that could be considered bad. There are things that are bad that might be considered good. There are things that are ugly, and by ugly, we mean there are complicated policy questions that are hard to address. So rather than just saying something is good, bad, good or bad, we're trying to mix this up a little bit and describe it in a way that folks may find more easily digestible. But throughout this presentation, please keep in mind that not everything bad is bad and not everything good is good, and not everything ugly may be ugly. So we'll leave it up to you all to kind of decide, but we've laid this out hopefully in a way that is somewhat simply. And with that being said, sorry, Ethan, to interrupt you, but I just wanted to get that out there.
No, I appreciate it, Joel. Obviously, it's good to have that frame of reference for all of this. Before jumping straight into this, I was just going to go ahead and reference a couple of the questions that's come up in the chat. I was part of the reason why I was a minute delayed sitting mute was I was halfway through typing an answer there. We hit on the new solar. On that is referencing the utility scale solar to be built. HB 951 mandates that 55% of that new solar will be Duke Energy owned and 45% will be independent solar producer owned. So I mentioned that rooftop solar in this regard is generally regarded as behind the meter, and that sort of term is encapsulated with the term they use as grid edge. So rooftop is generally kind of in the grid edge category there. So some of the other questions as far as clarifying on coal retirement, there is some wiggle room. The vast majority of coal is slated to be retired by 2030. With that said, a couple of units at the Marshall plant, they plan to close at 2033, and a couple of units at the Bellows Creek plant, they're hoping to close by 2036. And then there's wiggle room with a couple of different ones at the Roxborough plant, depending on which portfolio path they choose. But other than that, most the other ones should be closed by the 2030 date that was mentioned. And quickly, as far as the time frame regarding meeting 951, and we're going to get into this right into these slides, so I think it will become clear. 951 mandated 70% reduction by 2030. However, it did have a caveat saying that if the Utility Commission found that in order to meet the least cost timeline, they needed to, the utility would need to use advanced technologies, then that could extend the 2030 deadline. So legally, if they find they need to use things like, as Duke is calling offshore wind, I think we'd push back on that, but small modular nuclear reactors, and many things that John is going to touch on here in just a little bit, so I don't want to get into that. But those sorts of things, Duke is allowed to extend that timeline under 951. So we may not like it, but legally they are generally allowed to do that. So I think, you know, they'll keep answering some of these questions as they go in. I just wanted to hit a couple of those, particularly since they're hitting things that we were teeing up things we're about to talk a little bit more on. So as Joel said, there's not necessarily clean, good, bad, ugly. A lot of these issues have a lot of complication to them. So you'll hear me say a lot of things and maybe a little bit of a but. to them as well. So with solar, Duke really has proposed a decent amount of added solar capacity, doubling the existing capacity by 2030. A number of different, the different portfolios have different actual megawatts being added, but a significant amount. They're expecting that mostly to be competitive to procurement, which is how I would argue the best way to do these sorts of things. And generally, by mandating different firms put in different bids, you should get the cheapest price for all of the ratepayers, all of us ratepayers who then have to pay for that. But they did not commit completely, but they did say that was what they wanted to do. Though they did talk a lot about transmission constraints, which will continue to be an issue with the build out of utility scale solar across this state. And a number of different organizations, and I think individuals I've talked to think that it just kind of caps the amount of solar arbitrarily without saying this is exactly why, when perhaps a all source procurement method or something that would be more general might allow more solar to be adopted faster. But on the whole, I do think this is a good, solid proposal to build from. And it is far from an insignificant amount of new resource capacity that they are talking about adding here. Also, I think it's important to mention they are committed to wind energy development. I think as John mentioned a little earlier ago, onshore wind is really a piece of it that has been developed. June, I think we went backwards one.
You did, sorry.
No worries. So onshore wind is committed to in all of the portfolios, and offshore wind is in 3 out of the 4 looking at it. And Duke themselves within the carbon plan calls offshore wind a mature, scalable, and increasingly cost competitive zero carbon resource. So this is sort of language that we haven't really heard from Duke before. So definitely something that we want to commend, and hopefully with part of Duke Energy Renewables, which isn't part of their utility, having won an auction for one of the offshore wind blocks off the coast of North Carolina by Wilmington. Hopefully this speaks good for their intention to develop that resource. On the energy efficiency and demand side management programs, demand side management is a kind of catch-all phrase for behind the meter things. It's like smart meters, where the utility can sometimes control your thermostat in periods of high energy usage, maybe preheating or cooling your home hours ahead of anticipated peak usage. They can do it. There are a lot of innovations with electric vehicle charging that is expected to play a major role in this, where cars can be viewed as batteries, and the utility can use that as a grid asset from within your own home, and many other things. Just kind of a catch-all phrase for those sorts of things. And so they're pushing that. There's a number of different innovations they're pushing on those things. As we've mentioned, the carbon plan again is a big step over what the integrated resource plan was that they put forward here, over double the target there. And they include a number of the proposals from this energy efficiency and demand side management collaborative that has been working at the Utility Commission, including expanding some income qualified programs, like widening eligibility for weatherization programs, which a lot of times is insulation and just resiliency within homes, expanding their neighborhood energy saver program, and introducing a new energy burden reduction pilot, all of which would be looking at lower income homeowners and trying to increase their energy savings. There's also looking at an on-bill financing pilot for energy upgrades, things like hot water heaters, HVAC systems, refrigerators, big ticket items that tend to be inefficient but very expensive to replace to the newer, more efficient models. As well as updating their cost benefit calculations within these efforts, which gets very technical in a hurry. But the long story short, the more benefit Duke sees in doing these programs, the more Duke is likely to invest in the success of these programs. And so changing that cost benefit metric is important in helping them see that benefit. One final thing to mention on the good is Duke has put it out there. It was mentioned before. When it comes to renewables, it really helps for the grid to be tied over more as large of an area as possible. And right now, as many of you know, Duke, North Carolina is largely divided into Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas. Two utilities technically owned by the same group, but regulated separately at the state level. A lot of it's done jointly, but that can cause a lot of issues. And so they have proposed, hopefully in the not too distant, in the near to medium time horizon, to merge those entities into one, which should allow some cost savings across the entire utility footprint, and should hopefully allow more renewables to be more easily integrated into the grid as a whole, for the whole state. One of the buts that I mentioned, as I was going to say, but they also mentioned, because North Carolina is moving forward with this plan and South Carolina is not, they may find it that they have to then separate their North Carolina and South Carolina utilities, which could eat into some of those gains. Though we've done a lot more renewable development in North Carolina, so hopefully not too much. I think that's most of that. Thanks, June. Next slide. Actually, as I was saying, one last thought on the energy efficiency and demand side management. Another one of those buts. Duke has done a lot, has moved it forward, further and faster. We can do so much more. And I mentioned that rooftop solar is kind of involved, kind of put in that grid edge category. I would argue distributed energy generation like rooftop solar can accomplish far more than what Duke is proposing in this plan. And so that's absolutely a place that we can push back some. So on the straight bad sort of things, it absolutely calls for an expansion of fossil gas infrastructure, particularly the construction of a number of new plants, including combined cycle plants and combustion turbine plants. Similar, those both use natural gas, fracked gas, fossil gas, whatever you want to use for that, methane. But when you build these sorts of facilities, they are expected to be used for decades into the future. And so if they build these facilities now, it will be very difficult for them to be retired by the 2050 time horizon, much less our 2030 time horizon. So that is a major issue within this plan. And for a lot of it, they also assume that the Mountain Valley pipeline will be completed. I'm not sure how familiar many of you are with that, but it's a proposal to be built through, I believe, largely West Virginia and Virginia to get down into North Carolina. There may be some Kentucky in there. There's a lot of ecological issues going on with that. It may never reach us. That has to get through a number of other states, so just building that pipeline and the proposal to build it raises a lot of issues, risks of ability to achieve the plan, not to mention the just sheer issue with the carbon that would be released as a result of its completion. So that's one pretty major clear-cut issue with this plan that we really want to push back on. Another one, we think it doesn't really take a lot of the societal costs into account in the way that it should. Some of those are the tangible ones. We touched on a little bit, I know John in particular, about moving the definition of least cost and what gets included within that calculation. There was some movement within House Bill 951, but nowhere nearly enough as to really consider the broader costs of what carbon is doing to our society, to North Carolina, at our coastlines, and the risks of higher flooding and weather events and drought, much less many of the other kind of more physical impacts of that. And so, that's some of the tangible societal costs there that, we don't think the plan is dismissive at best of climate change. It talks about carbon a lot, but not a lot about climate change. And that's, I think, a real issue, because the reason why we're doing this is carbon and climate change, and part of it in the issues that'll do it. So that's a pretty major issue with it. And with that, it doesn't get into a lot of the intangible issues and societal costs. A lot of those have to do with legacy and justice-oriented costs from those communities that have already borne a disproportionate burden from, pollution, particulate pollution, sulfur pollution, nitrous oxide pollution, from, transportation highways, but also, of course, coal plants, natural gas plants, biogas facilities, potentially that might be hog waste, which has had some justice implications. So that all of those, again, are glossed over at best. And, luckily we're all here with CleanAIRE NC hosting us. They have done so much great work on the health issues of a lot of these. So if you want to dig in, roll up your sleeves and dig into that, that's a big issue that is really missing in a lot of this plan, that I think could really be vocally spoken up to. And then finally, there's a lot of risk, with the advanced technologies and certain issues with the carbon emitting fossil plants. So there's a lot of risk rewards and trade-offs that come with advanced technologies, leaning into them with uncertain development timelines and uncertain development costs. But in order to dig into all of that, I think I'm going to hand it back to our expert for that, John Gaertner. So thank you all, and be around for questions later.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm going to make short work, unfortunately, of the advanced technology. That's sort of what I really enjoy doing. But I saw two comments in the chat, one regarding sort of comparing advanced technology with offshore wind, and another one with, what are the prospects for advanced nuclear? And I'll address those specifically during this talk. Hopefully, if I don't, you can ask further question. So when, like Ethan said, the advanced technologies, there's nothing, we put them in the bad category because they're going to really be needed to replace coal and natural gas. But they're bad because they come with a lot of risk. We want to make sure we get the carbon reduction, the low cost, the reliability, and that we don't have a societal impact. And of course, when you're dealing with technologies that haven't been commercialized or built yet, they have the potential to be bad, but they also have the potential to be good. And that's going to be our responsibility. To the extent that these advanced technologies are incorporated, we need to make sure that they end up being good. Now, the 4 technologies that Duke has proposed, of all the possible ones they could have, are the use of hydrogen as a fuel, advanced nuclear power plants on top of the 11 units that they already operate in the Carolinas, long-term energy storage. And long-term means, you might think that means months and years. That means 4 hours or more. So 4 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, all that has great benefit, and it's hard to do right now with energy storage. And finally, the idea of a smart grid. The grid is sort of the circulation and the nervous system of the electric power company. It's the circulatory system because the transmission distribution sends the energy all the way down from the power plants to your house, your electrical outlet. And it's the nervous system because it's controlled by control systems and computers and artificial intelligence. And these things are going to help us, or hopefully, and I'll talk about some of the ways they can help us. But first, I want to point out that critics of these advanced technologies in the environmental community have some arguments that they use again and again over the years. And they're all partly true. Renewable, why not just use renewable energy? It's simpler. It doesn't cost anything for the fuel, and it's ready now. Second is, if we build these advanced technologies, it's way in the future. And, there's so much uncertainty, and we have to tolerate the carbon in the meantime while we're waiting to build these expensive and hard to build things. And finally, there's sort of some people think it's like a strategy on the part of the utilities, because if they spend all this money on this technology, it increases their profits and their stock price. Well, that's probably true, and that it ends up harming ratepayers. So there's partial truth in all these. And my caution to you is keep these on your mind, because we're not going to win this argument completely. None of these 4 arguments is going to probably win completely. At best, we're going to get a compromise. We'll get more renewables. We'll get more of what we want. But the proponents of doing it the other way will get partly what they want. But the way you're going to get the best outcome is to keep thinking about these objections and how you can prevent them from coming true in the bad side, and you can make them come true on the good side. Next slide, please. So I just want to briefly tell you, very briefly, how these technologies actually can be good. First of all, we know we have to phase out natural gas. Not only do we have a lot of it now, but we have to, we're going to build more of it as part of this plan if it's approved. And oh, by the way, I do want to point out, we're getting you the answer in stages here. I said they're going to close out coal plants by 2030, and Ethan correctly said there are 2 units at Marshall and 2 other large units in North Carolina that for sure, very likely will continue to run beyond that. The good news is those units should be converted mostly and perhaps complete to natural gas by that time. So we're doing it in stages. They may run beyond 2030, but if they do, we need to make sure they're running on a less harmful fuel. But anyway, in order to phase out the natural gas, there is an opportunity to take this natural gas, which is really methane, as Ethan pointed out. I don't know what's natural about it, but we can convert the operation of these plants, in theory, from using methane to using hydrogen, which is a clean, non-emitting fuel. The trouble is, we don't have an infrastructure for hydrogen right now. We have to make it. It isn't something you dig out of the ground. And we don't have an infrastructure to do it. Duke has committed some very modest steps, which you can read about in there, that they will use this hydrogen technology in their existing units, and they'll make sure what they buy in the future can use a hydrogen fuel. We need to really make sure that they're taking maximal advantage of that, because otherwise these plants, as Ethan said, can be around a long time. So hydrogen fuel is a good technology if it can reach that potential. Also, the use of the combustion turbines, which are the simpler gas plants, less efficient, dirtier, they could potentially be replaced by batteries and storage technology. And Duke has acknowledged that. In fact, they've included gas peakers and batteries in the same energy category now. In other words, they're going to try to push to use the batteries as much as possible. And that's great, because then we'd be able to phase out the gas peakers completely, or much more than we could otherwise. Now, as far as advanced nuclear is concerned, Duke claims to need those to replace existing coal and gas plants, because these are what they call baseload plants. These are plants that need to be able to run virtually all the time and under any circumstances. Coal and gas can do that. Nuclear power can do that. So Duke thinks they want to make sure they have an option to do that. Now, one of the questions in the chat was, well, why not just use offshore wind now? It has huge capacity capabilities, and that's true. But even if Duke is very aggressive in its building program for offshore wind, they probably can't build it fast enough to close these coal plants and prevent building the gas plants. That would be Duke's argument. And so it's up to them to make that argument. So it's not like, even though the offshore has great potential in it, and we may be able to build much more than is in this current plan, after we get into it, I think that Duke is being a little bit conservative there, not taking on too much. The third is long-term storage. And an advantage of long-term storage, in addition to replacing these peakers, which I talked about up above, is that as the Department of Energy study, the NREL study that Duke funded on renewables showed, the more long-term storage you can put on your grid, the more renewables you can put on. They kind of complement each other. You know, you reach a point where you can't add any more renewables because they're sort of too inefficient because you can't use the energy all the time. But if you have them attached to storage, then you can build even more renewables. So long-term storage is good if it increases renewables. And finally, the same with the smart grid. It's an ability that, as I said, it's like the circulatory system and the nervous system of the utility. And the more flexible it is, the more robust it is, the more smart it is, the more renewables you can load onto that grid. And the less margin you need, that is, the less backup plants you need, because the grid's going to be smart enough to optimize energy distribution. So these four technologies are the ones that Duke is proposing. Keep your eye on them. Be critical. That's good. And make sure that what we do is, if they end up in the plan, that we keep Duke's nose to the grindstone to make sure they understand these technologies, that they're using them in the most efficient way, and that they're using them when they need them, but that if renewables or some other energy efficiency programs and so forth are a better strategy, then of course that's better. So with that, I'm sorry it had to be so quick, but that's what we're going to talk about, advanced technologies. And this time I'm going to pass it correctly on to Joel.
Thanks, John. So the ugly. As has been mentioned several times, the carbon plan does not include a price on carbon. It does not adequately address the external costs of pollution on our communities. And we'll get to that again in a second, but I just wanted to reiterate that point here again. And also address a few things that were said about carbon leakage. So with regard to leakage, this is a much larger problem, and I believe somebody brought up the issue of a national carbon price, fee and dividend, and that would be a solution to leakage because it would be a national price on carbon. But today, in terms of the Duke Energy carbon plan that we're here talking about, that is not an option. So we have to look at what are options in this carbon plan, and one of those is an RTO or participation in a regional transmission program. Another place that we believe is ugly is the lack of interest addressing equity concerns. So in total, we think the three biggest issues that are hideously ugly are lack of joining an RTO or regional mechanism. They fail to address the cost of carbon and equity. So I'll cover those herein. So with regard to an RTO, an RTO, or a regional trading organization, or regional transmission organization, excuse me, is a group of companies that is overseen by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to enable those companies between states to trade electricity. So let's say Duke Energy and Southern Company, for example, are trading electricity between one another, and Duke wants to sell electricity at one price, Southern Company is selling at another, and they're trying to sell it into TVAs the Tennessee Valley Authority's transmission grid. Let's say Duke has a higher price, Southern has a lower. FERC would act as an intervener to settle that price at the lower price. So that has a much better effect, an equitable effect for ratepayers. Whereas what Duke has proposed, being a part of the what they're calling SEAM, or Southeast Energy Market, is not overseen by FERC, and the way that they would settle prices is on an average basis. So we have a problem with that, and we think it's pretty ugly. And we hope folks will encourage the NCUC to push joining an RTO rather than just joining SEAM. Regardless, they're doing one or the other, SEAM or an RTO, could have potential benefits. It opens up Duke Energy in North Carolina to additional renewable resources, and it also potentially limits the amount of electricity that Duke has to have available to cover what are called reserve capacity margins, which is the amount of electricity utility needs to maintain and mitigate against peak events. So regardless, it could be a potentially good thing, but again, it's ugly. These are ugly issues. There's no good answer here. Just kind of what we can hope for is best. Another potential that FERC has actually relates to leakage, and FERC could require what's called a carbon adder between regional transmission organizations. So if one RTO doesn't have a price on carbon or a law to restrict carbon dioxide emissions, and another one does, then the one that doesn't has to pay a carbon addition fee to sell electricity into that region. Moving ahead on prices on carbon, again, that's why we're proposing joining the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. And the big benefit to joining RGGI is a pot of money provided by the utility for reducing their emissions that can be used in other much more equitable ways, such as returning that revenue in the same way that the fee and dividend does to ratepayers to protect low and middle income individuals on increases to their bills. It can also be used for adaptation measures and for increasing energy efficiency measures. Finally, with regard to equity, Duke has not included anything in their plan regarding equity. They say that it's going to be addressed in the implementation phase, and they had one meeting 8 days prior to introducing their draft plan. It's pathetic, and that needs to be changed. So long story short here, because we're running on time, is there's no transparency about actual price increases, things like the costs that Duke will incur building new gas distribution, the Appalachian gas pipeline. That's not included in their carbon plan. This will be a much more inequitable plan than they propose, guaranteed. It's ugly. Nothing more to it. So with that, June, who do I turn it over to? Oh, it's still me. We got to cover security.
It is, but I'm just wondering, it's 5:06 and we really need to get to the how to engage.
Sure.
And
So,
I'm wondering if we could skip this one. Everybody, again, you'll have access to these slides. And
the
if
one,
you, yeah,
the
go
one
ahead.
thing we make here is that securitization is a tool that can make this plan far less costly, if they use it, and they use it right now. But in the current plan, they don't propose using securitization at all.
Right, right. Okay, but is this the one that has a separate docket?
Yes, it does.
Okay, so we need to be looking at that docket as well coming up.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joel. All right, we're going to move forward here to ways to engage and bring Jennifer back in for these last few slides. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thanks, June. Thanks, Joel and John. This is the J show, Joel, John, Jennifer. Ethan, sorry you're not in it. Thanks for hanging in there. And the key to all this, why we give you all this information, and you can find it, we'll send out the slides, is that we need voices. We need people to engage. We need people to show Duke and our state that people are out there, they care, they know there are better solutions, they know we're not pushing Duke hard enough. And there are 3 ways to engage. The main 2 that you need to know about are public testimony and written comments. Anybody who is a customer of the utility in North Carolina can submit these, and we're going to send you the website. Public testimony, next slide. There are actually several public comment periods. Depending on where you are in the state, you can show up in person. Let me tell you, it's powerful to show up in person in front of the Utilities Commission. Some of these stories that people tell about being near pollution, about being near a coal ash pond, about living near, any of these challenges, those stick with the people listening, if you can tell that story. So you can see the dates listed there throughout July, depending on where you are. There also are 2 virtual hearings, and apparently only the first 20 individuals who register will be allowed to testify at those virtual hearings. I don't know why they have that limit. There's no limit to the written comments. You can also, write your legislators because they're part of all this as well, but definitely the Utilities Commission, the public staff, the emails you can send in there. The main things that we have listed, next slide. Oh, by the way, the deadline for the final plan is December 31st to go to the legislature. And the deadline, the virtual hearings are August 23rd. And the interveners have to submit theirs, and there are several groups that are doing that by July 15th. North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, the Southern Environmental Law Center are 2 of the groups that are intervening. Next slide. So here are some of the things that you can raise in your email and your public testimony. Please sign up. We want them to fill all those slots. The goals aren't ambitious enough, right? The carbon reduction isn't happening fast enough. There's no transparency. We know that Duke has a rate structure that disadvantages low-income customers. So costs are being passed on to ratepayers in an inequitable way. Equity isn't in there at all. And Duke has been analyzed by national groups looking at rate structure that they're inherently hurting low-income ratepayers. And so there's no equity. There's no talk about pollution and challenged communities and where the plants are going away. It's just not addressed. And finally, the risk. All of the carbon plans include advanced technologies that, again, have an uncertain timeline. I mean, yeah, we're going to get there with those, but we have wind and solar available now, and they're not being advanced fast enough. So the uncertainty in that risk, that's something else that you can bring up in your talking points, that we need certainty. We need a path that we can count on. We need something that is tried and tested and being used all over the country. There's some states that are half their power comes from wind power right now, today. And we know that North Carolina has great wind potential. We know we have great solar potential. So there is a link there on the CleanAIRE website with these talking points. If you have a personal story, if you can talk about having asthma, if you can talk about being near a coal ash spill, or if someone these are all things that help paint a picture, bring the big idea home to what it actually means to people, what it means to us as residents of North Carolina, as users of the utilities that we know are emitting way too much carbon right now. So we wanted to leave a little bit of time. We know we have 3 minutes left. We want to leave a little bit of time for in-person questions. Let's see, do I have one more slide here?
Yeah.
Next slide. There is a webinar on June 22nd, and Do you want to talk about that real quick, June, or you want to?
Yeah, I'll just mention it. So the People Power NC that have the Fossil Free NC website, they will have a meeting on the 22nd at 6 to give you more information, what to expect when you're advocating before the Utilities Commission. So it's a really good follow-up to this one. They have 12 principles that we've signed on to about the carbon planning process, and there's a link there to register. And as I said, you'll receive this slideshow tomorrow with all the links. So at that, we will thank you. We're going to move to questions and answers.
Yep.
Is that right? Oh.
Absolutely. One more thing I just wanted to mention in terms of getting the word out. You can also write letters to the editor, and you can also, someone mentioned social media in the chat. Absolutely. Put it on social media, tag the Utilities Commission, tag your state representative. But there are ways to talk and to get our position out even without signing up. So letters to the editor all over the state, wouldn't that be awesome if people spoke up on the carbon plan? And our utilities commissioners are reading those too, and that leads to more conversation. Okay, just wanted to add those last two things. Time for
Thanks,
questions.
Jennifer. So we've stopped sharing the slideshow. Again, you'll get the slides, but also the recording that we'll send to you tomorrow. But questions, comments, this was a lot of information. Yeah, Kathy put in there about public. Yeah, if you're speaking publicly, you need to know how many words equals 2 minutes and how many words equals 3 minutes. So look that up and make sure you'll get to state your full testimony. Questions, folks? Comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead,
Mac.
After these hearings, which, we need to turn people out, but they're just starting, very soon. So I'm concerned that, we won't have the numbers we've really had in the past. But once this goes through the hearings, you said the legislature's going to have a role. What's the timeline, short and long term for this? And does the Utility Commission then accept it? What's happening after the hearings?
Good question.
The timeline.
Ethan?
Sure. So yeah, they had the hearings kind of confusingly right in the middle of the hearings. July 15th is the deadline for interveners to participate and submit their own comments on Duke's draft plan. There's an anticipation that a number of these interveners are putting together their own draft plan that can be compared to Duke's. So hopefully that'll be useful. After that, then you have the virtual hearings in August 23rd, I want to say. And then they have not committed to having an evidentiary hearing at the Utility Commission, but they have set a date in September where that would be if they decide to have it. Then the Utility Commission must adopt a plan by the end of this year. So the legislature no longer has a role directly in this. All of this was set up by HB 951, which they signed into law last fall. So they have had a role, but they've kicked a lot of this decision-making to the Utility Commission. So it'll be done by the end of this year. And then the plan is to reiterate this carbon plan every 2 years. So it should be re-upped and re-envisioned and redone in 2024 as well.
Yeah, so Ethan, the evidentiary hearing.
Yes.
Can you explain what that is? And is there anything we can do in our comments to ask for an evidentiary hearing?
Yeah, so I think the point of the evidentiary hearing is a lot of these things are very technical. And a lot of times both Duke and intervening nonprofits may rely on expert testimony to get to some of the numbers and details that they put into these plans. The evidentiary hearing provides an opportunity for each side of that to really dig into a lot of the data and question a lot of the assumptions that the other side may make when doing some of these models. And so that's the purpose of it. It can be very useful to, as I said, really the big thing is questioning some of these assumptions and showing to the Utility Commission trying to say, well, there's more evidence for this, or, well, there's actually a lot more uncertainty than Duke is projecting here, so we need to take this into account, or things like that. So it has some utility in that regard, but it would be the intervening parties that have a direct hand in that
Right.
hearing.
Right. And the Utilities Commission, I believe, hasn't ever offered that before. So I think it's a good thing for us to push for.
We got a couple of hands up. I see Tina, and I don't know if Faith had her hand up, but I think she may have dropped off. But Tina?
Yeah, I have a quick question. Across the nation, is this the norm for the Energy Corporation to draft its own carbon plan or any other kind of plan? I mean, why wouldn't the North Carolina Utilities Commission be in charge of that?
Good question.
We've brought that point up in a larger coalition that has dubbed themselves the People Power NC Coalition. We'll put a link to their website. It's fossilfreenc.org, and there will be more on that coming, but basically we agree with you, Tina. They have the authority to issue the final plan, as Ethan so eloquently put it. Duke's plan is a plan, not the plan. And there are interveners who will be introducing a plan as well. And in fact, the NCUC could offer their own plan, and they should offer their own plan because the law says they should.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
That is one thing we wanted to remind you, though. These nonprofits who will be introducing their own plans, we need to look at those plans, because in our comments, we may want to support those or add our 2 cents. Okay.
Yeah, no, I absolutely. And one other kind of side, just quick aside on that, Tina, as well. I think some of it is also which states you've seen actually doing this sort of work, which, you know, we can do so much better and should do so much better than kicking the can to Duke to kick off this whole conversation. But, you know, it is, some of that's the fact that Southern Company in Georgia, or Alabama Power, or Dominion in South Carolina, or TV, none of them have even been asked, because North Carolina is taking the lead within this region to do this work. So some of it, I think, has to do with the regulatory atmosphere within the Southeast, and some of the Midwest as well. So I think that, you know, unfortunately is some of it, but, you know, as June and Joel very, very well said, it is a plan, not the plan. And the Utility Commission should be consistently reminded of its authority, I would say, and be encouraged to exercise it in the most optimistic way possible, because we don't want to, you know, push with them, but we do want them to be firm in their own jobs.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Ethan. We do want to be a little sensitive that this is the regulatory body, and always be polite and say things in polite ways. So it is the South.
Our communications training always says the first thing you do is establish rapport, which means be nice and connect, or they won't listen to anything after that. There were a couple of questions about how people can read the intervening groups reports.
Yeah, and Joel put something, did you put the link to the NCUC where the interveners are listed, or?
That information is not neatly organized, but you can go through the docket, and where you see a petition to intervene, you can get an idea of who is intervening. Just taking a cursory look, you've got Person County. I know SELC is intervening on behalf of SACE, and Sierra Club, a few other organizations. Walmart is intervening. There's a very wide group of organizations, businesses, associations. And I should mention that as a ratepayer, people can intervene individually. If you are a ratepayer of Duke Energy Progress or Carolinas, you can submit a petition to intervene in the docket as an individual. Please don't say as a member of CleanAIRE and C or at Voices or any other group, but just as John Smith. And the NCUC will make a determination as to whether to approve you as an intervener. And if you do decide to intervene, the NCUC must address your comments. They can say, your comments have been noted, thank you, but they have to give some kind of response. If anyone on this call does decide to intervene, we would encourage you to list reasons why this docket is important to you, why you are impacted. And I would finally just say, if anyone is interested, they could reach out to me individually. My contact information is on our website.
I know that Faith had her hand up a while ago, but then she took it down. Faith, you're still on. Do you still have a question, or was it answered?
It was more of just a statement, but then possibly a question. I know at the Climate Reality in Charlotte, we're wanting to put together something through one of our apps that will allow our members to already have a written statement so we can send emails out very quickly. And so if anyone would like to help in writing some of those letters so that we're wording them properly and getting the right statements to the right people, we would be appreciative of that help, because we want to get as many people to speak at these events, but then also just sending out letters to the people that need to read them. So that was it.
Yeah, I actually put a list of some potential talking points in the chat. You know, we would encourage folks to use their own voice, but they can feel free to pull from that document. And if you want to use that to craft letters, you know, please feel free.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy?
Yeah, Kathy.
Thanks, June. I also want to mention that there is another docket going on this very minute that's very much related to clean energy, which is net energy metering or rooftop solar. I will put, you know, a link to that docket in the chat, but it's something where Duke Energy is basically trying to slow down rooftop solar.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Kathy.
And Kathy, thanks for all your help and help getting people signed up for the IRP public hearings.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
You did a great job getting the emails out.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can play a role.
Absolutely. One thing, I think I saw a question up there, just wanted to mention, as far as the release of the other nonprofits draft plan, we're not sure exactly when that will be. The deadline is July 15th. And I think we all know how people like to work towards deadlines. So I think you could expect right in and around July 15th for that to come in. I would also expect, I can't remember exactly who all is involved with it. I know the North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association is. I think a number of the groups represented by SELC, like Sierra Club and maybe SACE, may be involved as well. That is to say, I would imagine there will be email blasts sending that out. If you keep an eye out in and around there, if you're familiar with those groups and have signed up to some of their email newsletter stuff, that might be as easy a way to see it. Because as Joel mentioned, the Utility Commission docket system is their website is notoriously difficult to navigate. Unfortunately, it's about all we've got. So when you get in there, but as far as that specific plan, I would imagine you're going to see a lot of PR from a number of those nonprofits. And I think a group like People Power NC, it's been mentioned here, with their website, fossilfreenc.org, would also likely be putting out information regarding all of that as well. So that's not exact, I hope, as good as I can do as far as when we'll likely see it.
But Ethan, just a question. So the link that Joel sent us to showed the groups that were intervening, and it's just, if you click on the PDF, it's just their letter requesting to intervene. But we will be able at some point to see their documents.
Yes,
Correct. Yeah.
so the dockets are all publicly available. And so I think the link that Joel dropped was a link to all of the filings within that docket. So within that, you would click on there's a PDF, each one's its own PDF document. And so that carbon plan submittal would be its own line, most likely a joint submission by NCSEA and other interveners who all put it together. And it would be as a PDF version on that website. Because as you can see, it all has that date filed, but when you start scrolling down, there's hundreds of documents that have been filed in this docket, and we're far from being done. That's what I mean by it's rather unwieldy to really kind of dig into. And I think what Joel was saying, unfortunately, this is the best you can do. You can scroll through it and you'll see all the petitions to intervene, and that'll tell you everyone that's intervening. Might take you a little bit though. Unfortunately, it's not collated into a nice list.
Yeah. Great. Anyone else?
Someone just mentioned health impacts in the chat, and absolutely, that is something that brings all this home to how it impacts individual health and, rates of asthma and death, et cetera. So,
if you're interested in that, just check in with us, because we do have a health manager and we'll be putting together specific talking points for comments, not just on, coal and natural gas and that, but, the climate and health impacts of climate change that are caused by their portfolio, their energy portfolio.
And yes, getting those talking points translated to other languages is a great idea. I don't speak Spanish or any other language except for bad English, so
we'll take care of it though. Great idea.
Get it done.
This is Mac. I know we need to go soon. I have 2 comments.
Yeah.
One is that, this is great for all of us to be on the phone, but I would hope there's a way we could do some general public education about this in some way and maybe schedule a call on that. I'm really concerned that they schedule these in the middle of the summer. This is just like scheduling it right before Christmas, as DEQ usually does. They announce permits in January right before the holiday. So we're at a real disadvantage here. So, but we, our limitation, our problem throughout this whole state is environmental and climate literacy is at such a low level.
Yeah.
So whatever we can do to have some virtual webinars for the general public, and all of the organizations can, can do some blasts about those webinars. Whoever, maybe with combined capacity, we could do that. And secondly, we really need a separate conversation about the equity issues and also common themes that we all need to emphasize. And then lastly, my biggest concern is Duke refuses to acknowledge that methane is a carbon, and most of the public don't realize that methane is a carbon. And we need to stop calling it natural gas and either agree that we call it fossil gas, or the best word all the research has shown is to call it methane gas. That's what it is. So we need some discussions upon ourselves more before these hearings. We need to do more to just have some sessions for the general public. And we really need some themes that we're all going to say and words that are common, because this is just atrocious that they want to expand methane gas in the state. They'll never reduce carbon, and they're going to keep those facilities. And we all know that Duke makes its money by building stuff. And that's what this proposal is, to build the most expensive stuff.
Yep.
So it's not the lowest cost. And that's all I want to say. But we really need to really strategize more in these next few weeks.
Mac, we agree with you on all of those points. And in fact, I'll send you the talking points we generated. It uses methane throughout that document. So Yeah, all good, great points, and agree on all of them. And I know between us and People Power and the organizations involved in People Power and C, there will be much more coming.
Yeah. Thanks, Mac.
Kathy?
Sorry, didn't lower my hand.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't sure about that. All right, well, it's 5:33. We really appreciate everybody hanging on. It's easy to get a hold of Joel or I, but we will send you an email tomorrow with everybody's email addresses on that we're speaking tonight, for if you need to get in touch with us. And yeah, this is just the beginning. And this is the year to do it. So we need to organize. All righty. Thanks everybody again for joining us, and we will be in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
everyone.
hanging on.